let's just take a quick look at what he says to wives and husbands, what he says to children and parents, and what he says to slaves and masters, okay? Notice, first of all, he says it backwards. Especially in the culture of Bible times, you would expect him to say husbands and wives, parents and children, masters and slaves. Why doesn't he? Why does he say it backwards? This would have been shocking to the culture of the first century when Paul wrote this. He addresses wives first. He's trying to break the cultural idea that some people are better than other people. That's what he's trying to do. There are roles in society, but no one is better than anyone else. All people are equal before God. That's what he's demonstrating, even in the way he writes it. So he says this, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. I'm not going to spend hours trying to unpack and make sure no one's offended by this. We often get caught up on this word, submit. A better word probably for us, and just as valid of a translation, is defer. Wives, defer to your husband. Because what's being talked about here is a voluntary submission. He's saying, how can a wife, okay? So if you're a woman, you're married, you're a wife, how can you serve the Lord in your marriage? By deferring to your husband in light of the fact that God is in control of everything. You step back, you see things from God's perspective to some degree, and then you act accordingly. That's what he's showing. So if a wife were to look at her marriage and all she looks at is just the stuff going on between her and her husband, this isn't fair. Why should he get to make that decision? Why should this happen? Why should this be that way? If all she's looking at is what's right in front of her, all she's doing is looking at the Lego game, then it's not fair. But if she steps back, she's able, in the Lord, to voluntarily defer to her husband. And this is an act of compassion, kindness, love, gentleness, humility. It's what it is. Paul is saying, this is how wives can do what I was just talking about. This is, of course, not a verse for husbands to control their wives with. Husbands, this is the verse for husbands. Love your wives and don't be harsh with them. What does that mean? It specifically means don't try to control them. Don't try to force your wife to do a bunch of stuff just because you think she should do something different. And love her. She is actually to be, both the husband and the wife are to be first in the marriage in some sense. The husband is first in decision and leadership. The wife is first in priority. The husband is to lay his life down for her. It's a mutual role. And this is how husbands can live out what Paul was just talking about. If the husband is just thinking about, oh, she didn't do this thing, and I think she should do these things differently this way, he's only thinking about maybe hurts or wrongs in the marriage, he's only thinking about the Lego game, then this will seem unfair. I have to control her. I have to make her do the right thing. She's doing the wrong thing. But if we step back, we see that God is in control. We recognize that this is just a time. Then all of a sudden we're set free to do what Paul and what Jesus is asking us to do. Wives, defer to your husband. Husbands, put her first in priority and be gentle. These are graduates, remember these things. I know you're not married yet, but as I told you already, you need to go get married, have kids, and do good work. So this will come maybe sooner than you think for some of you. Remember these instructions. If Paul in Colossians, in Ephesians actually, he goes into much more detail, but in Colossians, he gives one thing for each group. If he could only tell wives to do one thing to make your marriage God's way and make it thrive, this is the thing. If he could only tell husbands to do one thing to make your marriage work and to do it God's way, this is the one thing. All right, kids, children, and parents. He puts children first in the list. Why? To show that parents are not more valuable than children. That's been a view in many societies. Also, children are not more valuable than parents. That might actually be the one we need to hear more in our society.